Hey, ninth graders, this is Mrs. Johnson. I'm going to go over your practice test because you are going to take your test next. So follow along. Make sure you have out the paper that you use for your scratch paper on the practice test, and we can look and see what you struggled with, and I can also give you some pointers as you're getting ready for the test. So I'm going to share my screen, and we are going to go over the entire practice test. All right, let's start with the quiz instructions here. I gave you the reflections, rotations, and translations. What's the word for that stuff? Like notes. I gave you the stuff that you could use for your test. So I'm going to scroll down and we're going to refer back to these as we take this test. All right, so use the mapping to transform each coordinate. Just type in the two numbers separated by a comma, no spaces, no parentheses. Some of you got this wrong because you put in spaces or you put in parentheses, or some of you just made simple mathematical errors. So the first thing that we're looking at here is it tells us negative y. So all of these y values are going to change sign. Doesn't mean make them negative, it just means change them. So if they used to be positive, they become negative, and if they used to be negative, they become positive. Well, all three of those were positive, so now I'm gonna move those to the front and change them to the opposite sign. So this positive 3 becomes a negative 3. That should be a comma. This positive 1 becomes a negative 1, because again, I'm moving the y's to the front, and that last positive 1 becomes a negative 1. Okay, so now let's talk about the x values. You'll notice the x values told us to change the sign of x and then add 5. So I've got to change this and then add 5. So if I change that from a negative 3 to a positive 3, I get 8. And when I add 5 to 8, oh my gosh, I did that like in my head. Okay, when I change that from a negative 3 to a positive 3, I get positive 3, and then adding 5, I get 8. Man, my brain did the math without my mouth following along. Okay, so then let's look at the next one. We've got, oh, this is very annoying. We've got this negative 2 here, and I'm going to change it to a positive 2 plus 5 gives me 7. Okay, and lastly, I've got a negative 5. I'm going to change the sign and make it a positive 5. Plus 5 is 10. So there are my 3 answers for question number 1. Okay, let's go to question number 2. In the above mapping, determine whether distance was preserved. Are these the same size, same shape? If I look from G to F, there's 1, 2, 3 spaces, and from G prime to F prime, 1, 2, 3 spaces, and you can see these go the same slopes for both of these sides. So yes, distance was preserved. These are congruent images. I can tell that they are the same size and shape by looking at them. Okay, and we could also go back to here and say, I didn't multiply by non-1 numbers. I didn't make it larger by dilating anywhere in there, which we talked about in the 8th grade, dilations. Okay, so use the mapping to transform each coordinate. We're gonna do the same thing again. So we start off here where it says negative x plus 3. That means I've got to take the opposite of x, and then I'm going to add 3 to it. So if I've got x as 0, well, the opposite of 0 is 0. And then if I add 3 to that, that gives me 3. Okay, on this next one, I'm doing negative x plus 3, or the opposite of x plus 3. So the opposite of negative 1 is positive 1, plus 3 is 4. Okay, opposite of 4 is negative 4, plus 3 is negative 1. And again, if you don't know how to do that math in your head, you could have typed in negative 4 plus 1 is, or plus, oh my goodness, negative 4 plus 3 is negative 1. Okay, now the second part is telling us to do negative 2 times the y value. So if my y value is already negative 2, I do negative 2 times negative 2, and that gives me positive 4. Then negative 2 times 1 gives me negative 2, and negative 2 times 4 is negative 8. So there are our x and our y values. Now I already have a suspicion that this is not going to be distance preserved because I multiplied by a 2 there, -2. And as I look at the picture, definitely got stretched. So that is no, distance was not preserved. Let's go down to number 5. All right, on number 5, we are rotating 180 degrees. Now, let me remind myself what the mapping is for that. When I rotate 180 degrees, that is this one right here. I'm gonna write that down so I don't forget it. I need to remember that 180 is going to be my -x and -y. That is what the final mapping from here tells me about 180 degrees. So when I scroll back down, I've got to use this mapping on problem number 5. Type in the two numbers separated by a comma, no spaces, no parentheses. So this 2, -4, I'm going to change the sign of both of those for my mapping of 180 degree rotation. So instead of 2, -4, it's going to be opposite of 2, which is -2, and opposite of -4, which is +4. Okay, these ones, the +5 becomes a -5, and the -1 becomes a +1. Right here, the +4 becomes a -4, and the -4 becomes a +4. So I did my mapping rotating 180 degrees. The next problem is asking me to reflect across the x-axis. I'm going to scroll back up and remind myself when I reflect across the x-axis, I'm using this top reflection key mapping that's written in red, and that mapping is x, -y. So I'm going to write that down over here, x, -y. And remember, negative just means opposite of. Okay, so I go down to my problem where I'm reflecting across the x-axis, and if I was given 1, 1, the x value is going to stay the same, and the y value changes sign. So instead of 1, 1, it's going to be 1, -1. Instead of 1, 3, it's going to be 1, -3. Instead of 3, 4, 3, -4. And instead of 4, 0, 4, -0? No, just 0, because we don't do opposites of 0. That would be the opposite of 0 spaces from the middle, and that's just 0 spaces from the middle. 0 absorbs negative signs. Yay! Okay, let's go to the next problem. On problem number 7, point A, which is 4, 1, was rotated 90 degrees clockwise about the origin. Which point represents A prime? So I am going to use my mapping for 90 degrees clockwise, and I'm going to transform 4, 1. So I'm going to come back up here, find my 90 degrees clockwise. That is y, -x. So I'm going to write that down, y, oh boy, that was poor handwriting, but it was beautiful singing. Okay, so I'm going to use that mapping on 4, 1. The y comes to the front, so the 1 is going to come to the front. I'm going to write this down as A prime. The y comes to the front as 1. And then the x changes sign and goes to the end. So this 4 changes to a -4 and goes to the end. Let's fingers crossed. Hopefully there's one that matches 1, -4. There is. I actually could have seen that in the picture, I guess. It's right there. Okay, so now I need to translate point A prime up 3 and to the left 5. So if I'm at this 1, -4, I'm going to go up 3 to the left, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Bam, it's right here. -4, -1. Let's find that. -4, -1. Okay, that was a double prime. Now a triple prime is going to be reflected across the x-axis. When I reflect across the x-axis, that is going x, -y. X, -y. All right, let's transform this last one. Okay, so the x value stays the same. It's going to be a -4 still. The y value changes to a positive because it's already a negative. So it's going to be -4, 1, which is not one of these options. So what are we doing wrong here? It's saying to reflect a double prime. Oh, it's because I'm looking at the wrong one. Okay. No, I'm not looking at the wrong one. All right, ninth graders, I figured out what I was doing wrong. It's because this hasn't been published yet and I have a typo on this thing. On yours, it did not say across the x-axis, it says across the y-axis. So that took me way too long to figure out, but if you can see that this was at -4, -1, when I cross over the y-axis, it would end up over here on 4, -1. So I'm going to choose 4, -1, and that will be my last piece. Okay, let's go to the next problem. Don't worry, that's going to be fixed on yours. That is fixed on yours, it just wasn't on mine yet. Okay, let's look at this next one. Reflect the line segment over the y-axis. So while I do this, I am going to count each of these spaces across the y-axis. So this A is 1, 2, 3 away. A prime is going to be 3 in the other direction. B is already on the y-axis, so B prime is just right there. Okay, so when I write those coordinates in, A prime is at the coordinate to the right 3, up 1. So I'm going to say 3, 1. B prime is to the right 0, down 1. So 0, -1. All right, the next piece says translate the new segment to the left 3 spaces. So as I go to the left 3 spaces here, I am going to, hold on, 1, 2, 3, draw a dot, and that is a double prime. 1, 2, 3, draw a dot, and that is B double prime. So A double prime is at 0, 1. B double prime is -3, -1. So I'm going to type those in. That was 0, 1 and -3, -1. All right. Let's go to the next one. Problem number 9. Which 2 transformations created the composition above? Something that you need to remember is which pieces came first, second, and third. So I am going to put a little marking on here. I know that the first drawing is the one that does not have primes. So that would be this A right here. And it goes from red to blue where there's a single prime to green where there's a triple prime. So as I talk about this, it's going from red to blue to green. All right. So now that I figured out the order, let's talk about what's actually happening here. So on A, to go to A prime, it changes direction. So that means it's not a transformation or a translation. It's not a translation because it didn't just slide from red to blue. It twists to get A prime down here, because if it had reflected, A would have landed on C prime, and that's not going to work. So that's a rotation, and that is going this direction around the circle. That is the correct direction around a clock, so that means it's going clockwise. That is a 90-degree rotation clockwise. Then from from the blue triangle to the green triangle, it stays the same orientation. So that's not a rotation, and that can't be a reflection. That means it's a translation. So I'm going to count how many it moves. It goes from blue to green. It has to go up 1, 2, 3, 4, to the left 2. So I counted that all from point C prime to C double prime. 1, 2, 3, 4 up, 1, 2 to the left. So I could translate up 4, left 2. Okay, question number 10. Again, I've got A prime, and A double prime. Now, A and A prime are in the same spot. So what the heck is going on there? It looks like B flips over here to get on B prime. We call flips reflections. So what did that reflect over? Well, that is the y-axis. So I'm going to click that this reflected over the y-axis. That happened first. Then from B prime to B double prime and from A prime to A double prime, the whole thing has to shift down. Remember, you can't say that it goes up 4 because that would be going from the double to the single. And that's not the way that counting works with these transformations. So this is going down 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces. And there's my second answer. So let's submit this quiz and let's see how we did. And it looks like we got 26 out of 26. Perfect score. All right, so now you've gone over the whole practice test and you are ready to take the test. Good luck, my lovely, lovely ninth graders.